Welcome back to Journey of a CISO. Thanks everybody for coming, watching these series of talks. Today, I am joined by a personal friend, as well as a former colleague, Matt King, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Belcan. Matt, if you don't mind giving us a little bit about your company, and I can tell you the questions I feel today are going to come very naturally since you and I are good friends. So thank you for doing this. But can you give us a little bit, Matt, about your organization? And since there's
Sure.
some new and aspiring CISOs watching this, just tell us a little bit about your personal career journey, how you became a CISO, your journey.
Sure. Happy to be here, Pam. Thank you for having me. Belcan is a global engineering services organization. It founded in 1958, started out as simply provided technical services to engineering organizations. Our primary books of business are aviation, automotive, industrial, defense, and space. We have four pillars of business. The first is engineering services, followed by our workforce solutions, which is basically deploying engineers to various organizations. We also have a pillar which is supply chain solutions. So it's also dedicated towards engineering or focused on engineering and helping the supply chain from an engineering perspective and manufacturing as well. And then lastly, we have a government IT solution services organization, which is providing IT-based services to the government related to the Department of Defense, related to the Department of Energy, and mostly driven around that area for the government. So in relation to my personal journey, my career started off in a very interesting fashion. So I didn't begin studying computer science or information security when I was in college. In fact, I was studying aerospace engineering. The irony there is I'm now the CISO for an aerospace engineering organization, which I think is really cool. And my journey shifted when I went into, I had a co-op at an organization, and that was provided, I had a cousin's husband who was working at an organization doing IT work, and I was actually at a summer job working at Hardee's of all places, and I was actually working outside that day doing landscaping for the local director because they needed some help from somebody, and I just volunteered to do it. It was like 90 degrees outside. I'm in pants and, the typical Hardee's garb, and sweating my rear off. And, they were going through the drive-through, and he goes, would you like to work in the air conditioning somewhere and make more money and learn about IT? I was like, you know what, that sounds really great. And so that summer, I spent the entire summer working at this organization and doing IT-related work and learning a lot of information. And I actually ended up going back. I was studying down in Florida at the time. I went back and changed my major to computer science. So the following summer, I actually switched back to Northern Kentucky University and finished out my collegiate career here in Northern Kentucky University. But during that time, I also started working as a temp back at the same place I started, and eventually went full-time there and started in, desktop support in that area, worked up to doing networking and infrastructure support, went into application-related support, got my MCSE along the way, and eventually just had a lot of partnership. I learned a lot through that MCSE of around security, particularly around Microsoft-related systems. And as a part of that, I recognized a lot of the gaps that we had within the environment. And I think at that time, the information security organization there was maybe two people. And those two people needed a lot of help and a lot of influence around the application-related areas and the leaders within the application areas. So, as these new regulations were coming into play, as these new programs were being developed, I helped partner with them to help to leverage my influence to get backing and to help to establish the program, and most importantly, help people understand why it was so important. And that was really exciting to me. And as I started growing in that area, I moved over to the fledgling e-business department when it was developed. It's funny when that term was used. I don't think e-business is used hardly at all anymore, but from a terminology perspective. But I was invited over there to help be a part of their support organization, and really just grew my influence around all those applications. And we started taking on more and more applications. I think when I left that area, there was about 120 applications that the area that I led was supporting. And during that time, one of my major initiatives was to focus on a challenge the organization had with certificates, SSL certificates for websites. And as a part of that, I addressed a number of challenges, excuse me, and that combined with the influence that I grew and the additional support that I provided the security team, there became an opening and an opportunity for me to come over. Initially, that was going to be a lateral movement to help develop the public key infrastructure. At that point in time, I knew that I wanted to get into leadership, and the statement that I made was, you know, I've got a lot of good ideas I can share with you, happy to partner with you. I'm not ready to move over just yet, but if a leadership role comes into play, count me in. So a year and a half later, that's exactly what happened. Leadership role came into play, moved over to that organization. That role grew, and that organization had a major security event that I got to get some great experience with, partnering with some great people to, you know, protect the organization, to defend the organization, to address that challenge. That exposure and that experience combined with my prior experiences got the attention of the organization I'm at now, Belcan. And in late 2016, they asked me to come over and lead the information security department here. There was only one person in information security here, and since then I've grown it. We're up to 12 people in the organization. Some of those are international. We are an international-based organization. Primarily, most of our business is in the U.S. We're about 75-25 from a national versus international perspective, but we do have 5 sites in the U.K. We've got 2 India sites, and we've got 1 in Canada. So that's a little bit about my journey into becoming an chief information security officer.
So there's a couple of things I learned about you, right? Like, one, do you still have your Hardee's garb?
No, I don't have my Hardee's stuff anymore.
Here's what I heard throughout your journey. And I don't know if you recognize this as a leader, but I'm going to call it out. You said multiple times influence. Do you think that that's the key to your success for your journey, is that ability to influence without the title? It sounds like you waited for it. You waited for a leadership role. And I want those aspiring CISOs to hear me, like, influence is super important, in my opinion, for your role. And
I agree.
Do you think waiting for it is something that people should do?
I think it is a lot easier to have influence and to move into a leadership role than it is to move into a leadership role and gain that influence. And the reason why I feel that way is because when you're working side by side with these people and you're helping them out with their tasks, and they know they can go to you for information, for assistance, for whatever they need, they know you have their backing. Basically, they know they're going to return the favor at some point, but they know that you're there as a part of what they're achieving. They know that you're there to help them. And I think that helps to gain that influence tremendously. And of course, when you move into a leadership role, when you do have a need to be able to gain some of that help, they're right there to be able to help you right away.
I totally agree with that. Great journey, great way for people to hear your path. I think it's interesting that your degree is now useful in your corporation. So fascinating. That's super fascinating. Okay, so what is your biggest challenge or challenges that you face, Matt, as a CISO right now?
You know, I struggle with this question because I think every day is different. That's part of the reason why I like being a CISO, is because, you know, you've got sort of the longer facing strategic decisions and you've got the shorter tactical decisions. Of course, you know, there's challenges each and every day from a tactical perspective, but from the strategic perspective, probably the biggest thing that I'm facing right now is we're in the middle of, or I should say in the beginning of, a cloud journey. And with that obviously becomes a lot of changes, right, of who's responsible for what, and as well as, you know, how do you apply the same controls that you have on-prem within the cloud. Dealing with that plus the government's cyber maturity model certification that's upcoming and preparing for that, those are probably the 2 biggest things, and marrying those 2 together becomes a big challenge for us, mainly because we are a services organization. we're not just servicing one customer. We've got hundreds of customers that we're servicing. So we've got to, separate our data for each of those customers to comply with the regulation and to comply with the government's requirements. So those are the biggest pieces right now, is really just dealing with that compliance piece when we move to the cloud.
What's different about your role, and maybe this is maybe it is the cloud aspect. I'm not sure how you're going to answer this, but what's different about the role of a CISO now versus 3 to 5 years ago? Is it the cloud journey, or is it something else in your mind?
I think it's a little bit about the cloud. I think the biggest differences in my mind are really surrounding, and this is no different year in and year out, but other than just how things are evolving from a technological perspective. So AI, for example, I heard on the radio the other day, or on a podcast rather, that one of the top cyber officers within the government decided to leave because he thinks in 15 to 20 years, China is going to have the best AI anywhere, and there's no way we're going to be able to compete with them. So, you think about what we need to do to stay on top of things like that, and how we focus our energy, moving from, more of the tactical, hands-on, human focus to more of the automated response type scenarios. I think that's how things are changing from a technology perspective. But I think they're also evolving from just a staffing and reporting structure perspective too. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of the other executives are becoming more smart on cybersecurity and information security, and they're wanting to be more involved as a part of that. And they just have a better pulse on things. So I think it's evolving just from a reportability perspective, and who leaders such as you and I are reporting to from that perspective. So I think there's a lot of things, but ultimately it comes down to, the bad guys are getting better, regulatory changes are occurring, and we gotta stay on top of that, and that's just going to get more and more on our shoulders from a management and compliance perspective. So, it's a lot, and it all comes down to, how do we acquire the proper visibility? How do we respond as quickly as possible to these threats that we're dealing with?
Do you think that there's going to be a blend of organizations, security in the different app dev worlds and the infrastructure worlds? Do you think we're going to blend at any given point, or blend further?
I think that is dependent on an organization and what vertical they're in. I think in some cases it makes more sense for them to be blended like that. I think you have to have some resources that have the combined skill sets of being an application developer and securing the technology, right? But at the same time, you still have to have the oversight of a CISO type role to provide that governance holistically.
With the resource constraints that this community is under, how do you look towards fostering a culture of diversity and inclusion on your team specifically?
That's a tough one, and I'll tell you why it's a tough one. The biggest reason why that is tough to really foster that and to grow that is because of the demographics of, how many people of non-white ethnicity, and basically it's mostly white males in this industry, right? If you think about it. Now that's growing significantly. And I'm always been as a person to find the best candidate. I'm looking for people, and I tout this to my team all the time. We treat everyone with dignity and respect, and we want to find the right candidate for the right role. However, I can tell you I'm helping to grow that community as a part of what Belcan is doing with the local Cincinnati public school systems. We've partnered with them to educate the high school students about cybersecurity and to get them certifications so that they can start out in a role immediately out of high school if they prefer. Now, we're working mostly with school systems that have lower income families, people that don't have as many opportunities. And that is mostly in very ethnically diverse group of kids. And actually, we hired one of our interns into our security operations center after he graduated because he did show a lot of good potential. And he was just eager and passionate about everything that he's doing. And it's good to have that ability to be able to provide better opportunities for the workforce and to grow from a diversity perspective, in my mind.
So, Matt, that's not just fostering a culture of diversity and inclusion, that's actually actioning it and reaching into the community to do something about it. I applaud you and your team for doing that. That is fantastic work.
Thank you.
And that's what it's going to take, is leaders like yourself reaching into the community and really taking action. It's all about action there. So thank you for that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So Matt, I think you and I both know how important it is to have the attention of the business. How do you foster communication with other groups within your organization and get them to buy into embracing security? Or another way to say it would be maintaining a security conscious organization.
That's a great question, and I want to touch on a little bit of the conversation we had earlier around influence, because leadership is influence in my mind. And in order to build that influence with newer people, you have to build relationships, and fostering those relationships, having conversations with people, in some cases doing things out of work to help to grow that camaraderie and to help people to understand, just by having normal conversations, of the importance of what we're trying to achieve and why we need to achieve it. Fortunately, my business leaders understand, they're having conversations regarding statements of work with all of our customers all the time, and embedded as a part of that are specific requirements for cybersecurity. However, some of those, depending on what type of work it is, may not be to the level that I expect based on our policies, based on our regulatory requirements for other things. So it's really a matter of just describing the whys of why this is needed, why is this investment required, why is this process required. But to your point about fostering a security conscious organization, it's part of my job and my responsibility to point out all those risks to the organization, right? So we have a lot of conversations around risk. We do a lot of partnership activities. For example, I met with the leadership team not too long ago. We had a third-party tabletop exercise that we did. It was more focused on the leadership team than it was on my team's response. Now, we're going to be doing another one later in the year for my team's response, but it was really to help them understand, if we had a major security event, a major security incident occur, what are all their responsibilities, and what does the situation look like from a chaos management perspective? Because you and I both know that it's a very chaotic world, and if you don't have things planned in terms of how you're going to react and how you're going to respond and who's responsible for what, it can make things drastically more difficult. So, having those conversations with them on a regular basis, meeting with them on a regular basis, talking about where their concerns are, where my concerns are, how we're addressing them, and how we can help support them, while also fostering enablement with security, right? I don't like to be in the position to be saying, you can't do this X, Y, Z because you're not able to do so. For me and my team, it's how can we get this done in a different way to where we're both protected and we're preventing the risk from that particular scenario, but also enabling you to get things done that you need to do.
Okay, so the events of the past year, how have they influenced or transformed how you will move your business forward in the coming years?
Yeah, good question. So with the events that we've had with COVID and remote workforce, and we did have a pretty big decline in our business since we are engineering, particularly from the aviation portion, right? So people weren't traveling. Nobody needs any new airplanes. That's obviously recovering now, which is great. But I think that taught us that we need to be more innovative and more nimble. And that's really the driving factor behind our Cloud First initiative, right? Of allowing us to sort of enable our customers more quickly, because previously let's say we were taking on a new customer and it was all on-prem, it would take us a good 3 weeks to a month to get them ready to move forward, just based on our internal processes and capabilities. So, as we look towards our ability to be able to enable the business to service our customers more quickly, for me and my team, it's a matter of developing a playbook, a plug-and-play playbook of, we've got this particular system, we've got this particular cloud, we've got this particular operation. Here's how we're going to secure this particular scenario. And by making that plug and play, we reduce the time requirements on both my team as well as the infrastructure team, because they know what they need to do, they know what they need to implement. And once they put that in place, we can just be the checkers, right? We can just verify that it's in place correctly and continue to verify as a part of the audit and compliance process. So that's really how we're changing from an organizational perspective, and how my team is changing to meet those needs.
I like the way you say that. We need to remain innovative and nimble. And the reason I like that is because if you're innovative and nimble at all times, you can pivot to
Absolutely.
new threats. I like that a lot, Matt. Thank you for that.
I was on a panel the other day they were talking a little bit about resilience, and one of the people in the panel said they don't like the term resilient, and he had an explanation for it, but I like the term resilient because, to me, adding that nimble and nimble capability, it really just shows that if you have a scenario, you can bounce back quickly and maybe isolate that system to be able to prevent any further damage from the scenario. But being able to quickly come back to how the system was operating prior to the particular event, I like that methodology, and that's part of the reason why I use that terminology.
Yes. Business resiliency is key, I think, with what we're up against these days. So interesting.
Absolutely.
I'd love to talk to that panelist. Okay, another topic for another day. But you are a partner, and you leverage partners. So in your opinion, what qualities do you seek out or value in a security partner, or what do you hold yourself to as a standard?
Yeah. So I love the way that you phrased that question, because you did use the word partner, and it's all about partnership. And I've worked with organizations that said they were a partner, but they didn't demonstrate their partnership, right? And what I mean by that is I'm looking for an organization that is going to help me to achieve, and not necessarily do so by all these different statements of work. Obviously, we both have to make money, right? So I understand that there's got to be an even balance. It has to be mutually beneficial, and I think having it be mutually beneficial is key to that partnership, right? Of we're helping each other in one way or another. You're helping us to improve our security posture or whatever scenario that we're dealing with, and we're helping you to grow as a business and the experiences, and to help you just from a revenue perspective, if nothing else. But I don't like, some organizations are so revenue focused, and they're so driven on that dollar and not very flexible, that becomes a thorn in my side from a partnership perspective. But I'm really looking for an organization to be transparent. I'm looking for them to be a true partner to help us to achieve in many different ways. And that can be different forms and fashion depending on what the organization is and what they're looking to provide. But, true partnerships to help improve things holistically without, exorbitantly being focused on the costs associated with such.
So I wrote down 3 things that just stood out to me. I love, instead of saying articulating you're a partner, demonstrating partnership. I love that, Matt. And then mutually beneficial. I think that's key. And then transparency. 3 really great points for strategic partnerships. Okay. Tell us about the conversation with your executive stakeholders, and how do you measure success and inform them? What information are they looking for? And as it relates to security, do you have any top metrics or any information that you routinely share? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, we're continuously sharing key metrics up the chain, and part of actually one of my initiatives this year for my team, for my staff, is to improve those metrics and to drive towards more meaningful metrics. What I mean by that is sometimes you provide data up the chain and it's not useful, and if it's not useful, we don't need them. But there could be other metrics that we need that are useful, that help to tell the story of how well we are doing, right? So it's a matter of it's not just a matter of, how many things are we investigating. It's a matter of how efficient are we becoming, how are our tools empowering us to be able to do that more effectively, and what's really benefiting us versus what are we missing within the organization. So, a lot of the conversations that I have moving up the chain are around are risk driven, but it's also, how are we preventing the risk? What are our technologies and our people and our processes doing to prevent those risks or address those risks? So, as that moves up the chain, I do have conversations with CEO on occasion, but most of those are had by my boss, the CIO. So my boss and I have regular cadences around risk management holistically and where our biggest risks lie. We talk about an approach to addressing those risks. He takes anything that is that he feels is a bigger challenge or something that he feels that the CEO needs to be aware of up the chain is basically what it comes down to. But, I do have conversations with him on occasion on very specific related items, just depending on what's occurring. And of course, he does come to me for specific questions. But, for me, going back to the whole partnership within the organization from a leadership structure, all that goes hand in hand, right? It's about being sure that you're communicating effectively and telling your story. And that's something when I was younger, I had challenges with doing, really, of telling the story of how we're being effective and what we need to do in order to be more effective in a scenario. So, I've had a lot of growth in my career from people such as yourself that help to educate me to get to the point where I'm at to be able to tell those stories effectively.
I think we both learned from each other through the years. I can tell you, I've learned a lot. Mm-hmm. So you got to have people.
Thank you.
Fill in your, fill in the gaps in your life, and you've definitely done that for me. What, Matt, would you, if you could go back, if you had a time machine, you could go back and tell yourself something? A lot of aspiring leaders are going to be watching this, and they want to hear from you, like, what would you tell your younger self, or what would you tell or say to the next generation of professionals?
When I hire people or when I'm mentoring people, I talk about this a lot because I want to make sure that they're focusing their energy appropriately on things. And it's not just about growing technical skill sets. We talk a lot about building the relationships. But in terms for me personally, I think it would be to speak up earlier and to speak up more frequently, because earlier on in my career, I would say that I was relying on all the quote unquote experts that were around me. And eventually I was put in a situation where nobody was speaking up. And I just decided one day that, okay, if nobody else is going to offer their opinion, I'm going to start offering my opinion. And I just started doing it more frequently and more often. And that helped me to gain all that influence that I've been talking about through this conversation, right? Is, offering that opinion more frequently, people start to look to you for your opinion, especially when you're providing good advice. And because of that, since they are coming to you for all these things, they'll continue to come to for these things, and that grows your influence within the organization. And the faster you can grow that influence, the faster you can move up in that organization, if that's what you're looking to achieve.
I like that. Basically, you're asking people to step up and lead without the title, right, and provide
exactly
expert advice, right? That's what this job is all about. That's nice. I like it. Okay, in the vein of,
I do want to add
Sure.
one thing to that too, and this is something that I felt like I did well early on, but something that I talk to people more and more about these days because, unfortunately, I see less and less of it. And that is never turn down a good opportunity, even if it's not in your area. If a leader is asking for somebody to volunteer to do something, I've always been of the type of person just to raise my hand and say, yep, I'll take that on, right? And not everybody will do that. And the more that you do that, the more opportunities are going to be presented to you. And not only can that gain your knowledge, but you're gaining that skill set, and that's adding to your resume. So if you're turning down any opportunity, even if it's extra work on your shoulders, even if you feel like you're being initially, unfairly paid for that, take it on anyway, because it's going to grow your resume. And even if you feel like you can't get to the point where you're being paid fairly within that organization, you now have that as an experience that you can take somewhere else.
You might learn something.
Absolutely. That's one thing I tell my people all the time is you can learn something from anyone. Sometimes it's how to do something more effectively. Sometimes it's not what not to do.
All right. That's right. That's so right. It's absolutely right. Okay. In the vein of it's Security Awareness Month, right? What's the one tip that you give non-security professionals, being a security professional yourself? One tip.
Yeah. Use a password manager, because there are too many people. I actually had a conversation with one of our employees the other day. A lot of the personal identity attacks that people have for their personal information are because they're sharing passwords across their different platforms. And when a breach or an exposure happens on this one platform, one of the methods that an attacker uses is spraying that across anywhere else that you may have that same email address and password for, and that's how you end up getting your identity stolen. So my first advice there is a combination of two things. One is use a password manager like LastPass or KeyPass or something to that effect. And then second is anytime you've got the ability to put multi-factor authentication in front of that, do so.
Great advice. Great advice. Matt,
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. I am truly honored that you would take time out of your busy schedule to do this today. I really appreciate you giving your advice and sharing your story with us. Thank you so much.
Very welcome. It's been a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Pam.
And thank you for watching our series, Journey of a CISO.